Well, more now on the intercontinental ballistic missile test fired by North Korea. I'm joined now by the political analyst, Robert E. Kelly, who specialises in the region. He joins me from Michigan. A very good evening to you, Professor Kelly. Your thoughts on the diplomatic avenues? Are there any that remain unexplored?
No, probably not in terms of diplomatic avenues, right? I mean, we've been talking about this North Korean nuclear issue now for going on 25 years. Most of the big options have already been explored at length. The military option, of course, would be a very risky and very dangerous. So, but if you look at the traditional stuff, right, it really does come back to the things we've been talking about for a while, which is sort of more sanctions, trying to get China to cooperate more. Maybe the North Koreans will actually sort of stick to an agreement. We negotiate with them. There's a lot of skepticism on that. But I mean, the diplomacy on this has been pretty set in place for a long time. We've had the UN sanctions in place for a while. So, I mean, I'm not really sure there's any sort of new big diplomatic sort of venture or opportunity that we haven't seen yet. We just have to keep on doing what we've been doing, as unsatisfying as that sounds.
Take us into North Korea's mindset. What is in it for them, pushing the envelope so hard?
Sure. The North Koreans, I think, are mostly concerned about regime security, which is to say they're very worried about the Americans doing something like what they did in Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan or Yugoslavia, regime change by force, airstrikes, things like that. And so the North Koreans figure if they have a nuclear weapon, the United States will never attack North Korea. This is probably correct. The North Koreans have told us on several occasions that if Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi had nuclear weapons, the United States would not have deposed those two in the last 15 years. And so that's really the likelihood. I do not believe that North Korea's nuclear weapons are offensively intended. I do not believe they intend to use them to invade South Korea or offensively strike the United States. This is a point up for some debate, but I think North Korea's goals are primarily defensive, which is to say they want to just maintain the regime they had. The elites wants to continue the gangster lifestyle that they enjoy right now, and they see nuclear weapons as the ultimate defense of that.
So is the United States, and indeed those nations closer to the threat, South Korea, Japan. Are they just going to have to learn to live with it?
They already have, I would argue, actually. North Korea has been a real threat to South Korea and Japan for many years. Conventional. It's now morphing into nuclear, but the North Koreans have had the ability to do a great deal of damage to both of America's major allies in the region before, and they have, to be perfectly honest. This is one of the things I think Western audiences are always surprised about, right? When we have a North Korean war scare and Western journalists come to Seoul, and they're always sort of shocked at how sanguine South Koreans are, right? They always say, we've heard this before and we're not worried, and there's often sort of alarmism in the West about North Korea, but there's not in the region. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, right? I mean, you can actually argue that, we should push North Korea a great deal harder. But yes, the South Koreans and the Japanese, I would argue, have basically adapted to the North Korean threat.
Of course, a military event, if I can call it that, can occur by accident, if not necessarily design. All it takes is for the American cyber program, for instance, to jigger with one of the guidance systems of one of these tests, and who knows where it might end up.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the long-term concerns now, maybe medium-term concerns, as North Korea emerges as a nuclear power, right? And that is nuclear safety. On the upside, we've never actually had anything like an accidental launch or an accidental explosion of a nuclear weapon, right? Pakistan is arguably the country with nuclear weapons that has where people worry the most about nuclear security, and there's never been anything like that. There's never been a weapon stolen from Pakistan that we know of, things like that. There was the Chernobyl meltdown in the Soviet Union, of course, but that happened one time. So if the North Koreans are using technologies from those states, which they probably are, there's a reasonable possibility of nuclear security. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the big issues in the future, right? Are the North Koreans going to proliferate? Is something going to happen? Is there going to be a mistaken launch? Is there going to be a general who overthrows the government and starts pushing buttons? It's not good that North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's just the options for denuclearizing them are pretty poor.
Well, Professor, thank you very much indeed. Robert E. Kelly there with his thoughts on the threat and how to contain it of North Korea.